Everybody, it is July 6th, Tuesday. Hope everybody had a nice Independence 4th of July weekend. I know I did, and now I need a vacation from my vacation. So Debbie's smiling because we had a little too much fun over the weekend. Anyways, this is a little bit different view than you're used to coming on a Tech Talk, because today, as many of you know, I am getting ready to go on Jeepers Jamboree, which is on the Rubicon. So just consider that like your big run of the year. And we always talk about, we've made reference several times as to doing a nut and bolt check. Well, what the heck does that mean? So I'm going to go through that with you in great detail today and talk about what you should be looking at. And in a few minutes, either after this show or, I don't want you to leave during the show, but Jamie is going to upload this checklist to our Tech Talk page on our website, and you'll be able to go over there and download this so that you can do this yourself. If you're like me and you've been out there beating on your vehicle for this years, this one's been done for 8 years, so we've been beating on it for a long time, and I pay very close attention to many things, not only when I've got it here in the lift, but while I'm operating it, right? I make note of anything unusual. I am constantly checking the wheel bearings for temperature. I'm constantly retorquing my lug nuts. There are several things that I just stay on top of, including oil level. Yep.
Tyler Hagan, hey Tony, are those the new Baja Boss ATs?
No, these are the MTs. I guess we don't have an AT over here right now. It's very similar to this, but scrunched together. Doesn't quite have these same voids. I've got them on my truck, and we just got some 37s in, so I see that the different sizes are starting to flow in, which is great. So yeah. It's appreciate the question, and honey, maybe you could tell me, do we have a lot of our usual suspects on today?
We do have a lot of our usual
Yep,
suspects.
good.
Tyler Hagan, Anthony Paquette,
Nice.
GenRight Dave,
Nice.
Esther Parrott Newcomb, Joshua Nasser, Don Cars, Corey Lone Wolf Picard.
Excellent. To name a
Jeff
few.
Logan,
All right.
Tom, Ed Gladden, Kelly Sims, Jeremy Balky.
Wow.
Yeah, we got
The whole crew.
all kinds
Excellent.
of friends on.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. This is going to move kind of fast and furious. So I'm just going to start going through this. We've got a lot to cover. Type in those questions for Debbie, and I'll see if I can kind of keep things on track here. We are going to go from the front to the back. That's how I've organized my checklist. And you're going to do a couple of things. One is, before you take the wheel off, I want you to torque on the wheel to see if you can feel for a loose wheel bearing, okay? Your wheel bearing is housed right inside of here, and in the back, it's tucked in as part of the end of the axle. And I can tell you that after I took off the wheel, well, actually, let me back up. The first thing I want you to pay attention to is how easy did the lug nuts come off, okay? Mine, the gun had to work a little bit to get it off. Now, if you're doing it by hand, you'll know, but you want to know if any of those lug nuts were loose. So that's an important aspect of keeping track and maintaining your vehicle. I mean, and this is like step one, okay? You really need to know. Now, you can also tell signs if you see wear on the rotor or on the hub, then you'll know if this was loose. Mine was not loose. You can also look at the back side of the wheel, and you'll see wear on the back side of the wheel. These are all things you want to pay attention to. Also, the inside of the wheel. So, Alex, if we look over on this one, what I'm looking for, did anything get caught inside the wheel between the brake caliper and my wheel? This is clean, no scratches. If we look at my other wheel right here, you can see there's some scratches inside, and something has gotten caught in there. So again, something I need to pay attention to. So what I'll do then is I'm going to look at the outside of this caliper. Now here, you can see, look, there's big grooves. So something, some rock or something got caught in there. So that's something, you know, depending on, this is a nice billet brake, you know, so it's thick. But, you know, if this was a lesser brake, it might have worn through into the pocket that actually houses the pistons and stuff. So you want to be careful. The other thing I want to point out to you is that these are the only 2 bolts that hold this caliper on. Okay, and in my case, I've got them, Alex, maybe you can rotate around. I've got them torque sealed. Let me grab my little light, because this is an important thing. And where's my light here? Come on, baby. There we go. Okay, see that little yellow torque seal right there? So that tells me that the bolt has not moved. Same on the top. Right? That's it. That's all that holds it on. Now, I have 2 bigger ones. In my case, you know, because it's a Dana 60, I've got an adapter. And I also torque seal these, and these are red Loctited. So if I'm going to take the caliper off, it comes here, not here. Okay, so those are important aspects of inspecting your brake system, okay? Now, spin back to this side, Alex. You can see I got a problem. So I also got a rock in between the pad and the rotor. So I'm gonna have to change this rotor. That's not good. And in my case, I've got what's called a 2-piece rotor. So this is called a hat and rotor. And I also check these bolts, which have also been torque sealed, right? So I make sure that none of the torque seal is broken. Now in this case, I'm gonna have to break all the torque seal, put a new rotor on, keeping this hat. So got a little bit of work to do there. Again, I'm looking at the threads on the bolts. You're just looking at everything, right? Oh, here's another tech tip for you. I put a black and a red mark on my hub so I know when it's locked. And that way, even from a few feet away, I can tell, is the hub locked or not.
Hey, Tony.
Yep.
We've got a question. Mitch Moore needs some assistance. He says, do you have any tips on keeping from crushing the crossover tube on the R1 caliper? He said he's crushed 3 now.
Okay, yeah, that's actually a good topic. Jordan and I have also experienced that, and it's part of that rock getting caught in there. Jamie too, that's right, yeah. So what we've done in the past is we've actually epoxied in a cover. So a little metal cover to help save that thing. And I know I've been working with R1 to actually beef that area up and add some more material there and make it stronger. So that'll be updated at some point. Okay, so more questions, or can I keep going?
That's all right, go ahead.
Okay, the next thing you want to do is you want to start inspecting the steering. Okay, now think about the steering as you would hold the wheel, right? So you're going to start with the steering box. And there's 3 or 4 bolts that hold the steering box onto the frame, and you need to check those. These are very common that they would come loose, and I don't care whether you have a CJ, a TJ, a YJ, a JK, a JL, all those bolts are right there on the side of the frame, and that's where they're at. Okay, next, the steering box sends your input down what's called a sector shaft. Okay, and then that holds the pitman arm on with a big nut. So you need to check this nut. Now this nut, actually, I want to mention something else too. I purposely did not clean this vehicle, okay, because I'm looking for shiny spots, wear spots, excessive oil, anything, right, that could be a sign. If I had pressure washed this, I wouldn't be able to see it. Now, sometimes if you're in muddy conditions, you don't have that luxury, you got to wash it. But I just want to remind you guys that if you have the ability not to. So we're looking at this nut right here. It's a big nut. It's 1 and 5/16. And you need to check that from time to time and make sure, typically if you've had the pitman arm off or you just put on a new box, it's going to take a few cycles, maybe 2 or 3, before that nut stays tight. Then you want to check, this is called the drag link, you want to check the bolts on both ends, and you want to check the healthiness of the joints. So I am cranking this to move it. That's how tight it should be. Okay, if it's any looser, 1 or more of these joints is worn. Okay, and then you got to make a choice whether it's time to change it right now or until after your trip. Same with this. See how tight this one is? I can't even move it. So super tight. That's perfect. There's also rod ends on the ram. And look, I just found something else. So my jam nut on the ram is loose right here. And that's a problem. That's not acceptable, because what can happen is this can rotate, and when everything cycles up, these can get smashed. So I've got to tighten that jam nut. So I'll add that to my list. Okay. Then you're going to do the same thing with your tie rod. You're going to make sure all these are tight. Now, to check these, if you don't have torque seal like I do, right? So you're checking everything. You're doing a visual. You're looking at the axle. Are there bash marks? Is the tie rod straight? Is it bent? Is there anything worn? I'm looking at the steering lines to make sure nothing's hit them, or they're getting cracked or pulled too tight or anything, right? This is your chance to really look at it all. And I don't know if you noticed, but I've got the high steer arms, so I did the torque seal on those too. These little guys, these are strong bolts, but there's only 5 of them that hold that on. So you want, and some have as few as 2 or 3. So you really want to keep track of that stuff. It's definitely important.
Hey, Tone.
Yep.
Good spot for a couple questions.
Sure.
Mike Malash would like to know how the ball joint delete kits are holding up.
Yep. So this is, so just prior to me taking off the wheel and really lifting this thing up high like it is now, I did a test to see how tight they are. So I checked the wheel bearing and I checked the ball joints. So when you get the weight off like this is when you get the true reading of how solid that stuff is. And mine are still nice and tight. I also just recently had my tie rod off, so I was able to move the knuckles independently of the whole system. That's really the best way to check it, and they were nice and tight.
Jeff Perkins said, hey, Tony, what should I check if I don't have a steering box?
Then, okay, in that case, if you've got a ram only, then it would be inserted right here in the middle of your tie rod. So you'd have another one of these here and another one of these here, and you need to check the clamp bolts, all of the bolts on the end, you know, everything. Look, this is your steering. You don't want any slop. You don't want anything worn. You got to make sure it's tight, right? Especially like on the Rubicon, you've got to drive over an hour on the highway. Okay, and you're fully loaded. So if you've got any problem with your Jeep, it's going to be accentuated. It's going to be squirrely and loose. And, you know, last thing you want to do on your trip is get in an accident or somehow damage your vehicle. So at least before you get on the trail, you don't want to damage it. So, yeah, good question.
Esther Parrott Newcomb asked if you could email the checklist like the camping one.
We certainly could, yeah. Okay, it'll be on the website. Okay. and
maybe we could get it in the next TikTok email or something.
Yeah, for sure.
Lisa Adams, hey, Tony and Debbie, please remind people to check their winch line to make sure the line spoiled properly before hitting the trail. Yeah,
that's a good point. So I often use my winch to help other people, right? So what happens is we're typically in a hurry. We just spool it back in and don't really worry about how nicely it's wrapped. You do need to pull this out and coil it really nicely. Otherwise, it starts wrapping over itself and getting jammed, and then you can't get it out. Now, I will give you a tip. If, in fact, your winch line gets jammed, what you do is you pull it out as far as you can and you wrap it around something like this or a bar, anything on the winch, and then you can have the person inside, unless you're outside with the control yourself, run the winch in and out and it'll detangle it, okay? And then it may not like totally free it up, so you might have to do that a few times, but it is a quick way to get the winch untangled. Now, because we got that question, I'm gonna point out something else. I damaged the bottom of my bumper and winch tray, and it was starting to touch my winch rope. So this is, you know, I was very concerned that this could start shredding the rope right here. So that's an area I'm going to keep an eye on. And when I'm winching somebody, I want to make sure that it doesn't bundle up too high right there, or it will damage the rope. So at some point, I'll have to pull that winch tray and put a new one on. So just keep track. This is what I'm talking about. Your Jeep's not going to be perfect. If you've taken out and wheeled it, you know, your axle's not going to be perfectly smooth. It's going to have bash marks. You just want to make sure it's not leaking. You know, the diff bolts are loose, the cover's loose, The cover is part of the integrity of the axle. The cover has to be tight. And I don't know if I've ever told you guys this, but I only use true high temperature orange 100% silicone, not RTV. And I let it set for 24 hours. So that has a bonding strength to it that helps so that just the bolts aren't holding that. I've got a big bonded surface across the whole thing. So, yep, Deb's got another question.
Tyler Takeo, when you find a loose bolt, are you taking the bolt all the way out and re-greasing, or are you just tightening it back down?
So it depends. Mom's mic is still working after that drop, right? Okay. Depends. If I'm looking at a bolt like this, what I'll do, this happens to be a 9/16, I know that one by heart. I will retorque it. These get about 18 foot-pounds. And if that feels funny at all, it better just like lock and stop. If it kind of goes past, if it has a soft, that means the threads are going, okay? You gotta pull that out. In fact, that's like a whole disassembly, because now you're going to drill this, put a helicoil in, and fix it the right way, okay? Now, if this is like the night before your trip, you know, you could probably get away with one diff bolt that's not perfect, right? I'd silicone that baby and put it in there. But that needs to get fixed. You can't just leave it like that. So this show wasn't about quick fixes to get you on the trail. This is like what to look for and know your vehicle, okay? So more questions?
A little bit off topic, but Deborah Carnell, 2014 JKU 4-inch lift, 37-inch tires, is very squirrely down the road. She has had everything checked. What is she missing?
Okay, so I don't know if you checked it, somebody else checked it. Here's what I know. Unless you physically take something apart, you cannot really tell. So this stuff that I'm doing, you know, where I'm cranking it like this, a track bar, you know, these joints on both ends. So if you notice, we run a Heim on one end, and this is a big one. This is a 3/4 on this side. And then we run a double shear Johnny joint on this side. And if either of those have slop, it's going to feel terrible. This, by the way, if you don't understand what a track bar does, this is what keeps the axle underneath the vehicle. So when you turn the steering wheel, it is directly fighting this track bar, okay? Or when you go around a corner, that's what's holding the axle under the car as you go around. So that track bar has to be good. Now, beyond the track bar, you know, now you're talking about the ball joints on the knuckle or the wheel bearing, okay? So if any of those things are worn, and typically what happens is all these things start to wear a little. But the problem is when they're a little bit worn and you stack it all up, it turns into like, oh man, this thing's like loosey-goosey and sloppy. So that's part of the maintenance schedule that you've got to figure out. Now, here's what I recommend. You start replacing stuff until you get it solved. And by the way, the one you're taking off is your good spare. It still works. It'll get you off the trail. It'll get somebody else off the trail. You just keep it, and then when you're really in a bind, you can put that back in. You know it's not perfect, but it'll get you off the trail. Okay, more questions?
Ken Brandt, that needle bearing on your diff cover is the neatest thing ever. I bend my tie rod constantly.
Yes. So I wasn't necessarily expecting this to be a tech talk like that, but guys, this is something that I did a while ago, and the purpose is this. In order to bend a piece of metal, you actually have to push it up past where it wants to be in terms of being straight, and then it will stay bent. Okay, what this does is it doesn't let it bend very far, so it can't ever get bent. All right, so I don't know. We sell these. It's, you know, super easy to put on. You just weld it onto the diff cover, and they're greasable, and it's got a little needle bearing in there, so you can't blow that thing up. Okay, more questions. Okay, so now we've kind of looked at all this thing. The next thing I want you to do, and everybody's got one of these, but it's going to take a big one, and I mean a big one. This is what, like an 18 or 20 inch, 18 inch. Okay, so I can very quickly put this on the nut side. Now again, this is provided that you don't have the torque seal like I do, and you can just pull on this. Right now you can see I'm actually turning the steering than I am busting the nut loose. So this is a 3/4 inch bolt. Those are 150 minimum foot-pounds. That's big. Like I should not be able to move that, okay? So, but again, I know my vehicle, right? This is all the stuff that I check. Now there's also, and you have it on yours too, there's little nuts and bolts buried inside here that hold the wheel bearing on. You can see that one inside there. There's 4 of them. Some have 3, some have 4. Okay. You need to check those too. Now, at least you want to know what it's supposed to look like before it looks damaged, okay? And I realize not everybody works on their vehicle, but the bottom line is unless you bring your mechanic with you out on the trail, you better know what your vehicle looks like. Okay, so we've covered a lot of stuff on the front end. Let's go to the underside and look at a couple of things on the front axle.
Hey, Tone,
Yeah.
quick question
Yeah.
before you move on. Colby Scroggins, is torque seal what you mark the bolts with?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, and what it looks like a very thin silicone when you put it on, but then when it dries, it gets rock hard. Okay, so if anything moves, it breaks it. So you know right away just by visually looking at it. And you can order it on McMaster Car. I'm sure there's other places too. And it comes in different colors. I happen to like the yellow. I've seen fluorescent colors and
Yeah,
you know.
Val added you can get on Amazon Napa.
Yeah, yeah. And it comes in a little tube like Loctite. That's what it looks. It looks kind of like Loctite. Okay, so the next thing I just put new drive shafts on, right? So I know everything here is good, right? I'm looking at the pinion seal. There's no leaks. I know that I properly tightened because I like to do all this stuff myself. Each of these drive shaft strap nuts. And I also checked this. There should be a small amount of play. I don't know, can they see me jiggling that? Okay. A small amount of play, and that's the backlash between the pinion and the ring gear. Okay, that is totally normal. If we go to the rear, it's probably even a little bit more. Yeah, you can see it's just slightly more. So the rear typically runs hotter than the front, so they have to leave that amount of room in there, not only for a thin film of oil, but to give the thing room to expand as it gets hot. And by the way, differentials get hot. They're running like 250, 275 degrees. So, you know, there's going to be some expansion there. Okay, so your drive shaft might have a little zerd fitting inside the U-joint, so you might have to lube that, okay? The other thing while we're down here is, you know, there's zerd fittings on the ends of all my Johnny joints, right? So yours may be vulcanized rubber, yours might be some kind of a serviceable or lubable joint. Sometimes it takes a needle fitting, sometimes it takes a zerd fitting. So your grease gun will have to be the right thing. And grease guns can be very small. They can be like a, you know, couple squirt kind of a thing, or you can get a full size, you know, and from the auto parts store and really lube stuff up. So typical joint only takes a couple squirts. If you put too much grease in there, you're gonna blow the center out, and then you're really gonna have a sloppy vehicle. So
Hey,
the other, yeah.
Dave Julian, why do you have the nut on top of your steering arms? If you lose the nut, the bolt will fall out.
Yes, so that's a normal question, and we'll circle back when we get back to the front. I'll answer that one. Okay. So while I'm down here, I'm checking so in my case, I've got the braided steel brake lines. I'm still inspecting those for damage, leaks. You know, you'd see leaks coming out. Again, I want to make sure everything when I start my trip looks good. Okay. In my case, I've got hard lines that run all along here, and I want to make sure the bump stop didn't come down and smash my hard brake line. Obviously, that's going to make the brakes work bad. And then I've got a little flexible line up here that runs into a hard line and back to a flex. Okay, so now if you're watching, I noticed something else. I noticed this whole thing has a layer of oil on it. Okay, so rather than just wiping it off, what I need to do is figure out where it came from. So I could have overfilled my transmission. It might not be, it looks kind of red, so I'm assuming it's transmission fluid. But that's one of those things that I'm gonna need to investigate and find out, did it just come out of the overflow, or do I have a pump seal that's leaking, or maybe the fill tube came disconnected from the transmission housing. You can't, this is too wet. You got to figure out what's going on there. Okay. Next thing, look at your control arms. You know, mine are really scratched up. I noticed this one even looks a little bit bent. So that's something I want to keep track of. You know, this vehicle gets a lot of use. You know, these are the same arms that have been on here since I raced King of the Hammers in this thing. So it has seen a lot of abuse. And again, you want to inspect all your mounts, right? You want to make sure there's no cracks. You want to make sure the bolts are tight. Again, you can see this one has orange. There's a good example, because this is from KOH. So we used a brighter torque seal on there. And again, these are Unitorque nuts. Like, this is all the good, you know, hardware. And that's what you're looking for.
And that's what comes with all of our suspension kit.
That comes with all of our suspension kit. Grade A bolt, Unitorque nut. Up on top of my differential, and this is a good one for Mitch, there's 4 little bolts up here. They're actually not that small. They're actually 1/2 inch 20, but the heads look small. And these should be red Loctited in. These should really be on there. And you got to make sure these are tight as well. I've also torque sealed those. So, all right, what else? So while I'm under here, I'm looking for anything, right? I'm looking up at the steering box. I'm looking at the back of the radiator. You know, I'm looking at my springs, you know, making sure, let's come back around to the front. So you can see on this one, there's some chips on the paint of the spring. So you want to make sure that when you see something like that, is it rubbing, or did I get some rocks in there? Or, you know, this is also, again, the one that I raced at KOH, so I'm sure I had some stuff thrown up at me and it just chipped the paint on there. Okay, so let's talk about the bolt.
Hey, Tone?
Yeah.
Quick question, Christopher Yawns. How can you tell if a transfer case is going bad?
Oh, so the transfer case has what's called a planetary gear set inside. And I don't mean to get too technical here, but they're tiny little gears that run around inside on this bigger gear. And typically there's 5 of them, right? And these little guys, you can imagine if they're small like that, that means there's a tiny little bearing inside. And when you go fast, they're going like the speed of sound, okay? So typically what happens is the bearing wears out, then it trashes the shaft on that. So it's going to make a horrendous noise. It's going to have a howl. It's good. You'll get some warning, but it's not much. Okay, so hopefully you're very acute to that. If you're one of those guys that's like blasting the stereo and not paying attention to your vehicle, that's going to leave you broken on the trail. So you really need to pay attention to that. And when you change the oil, because you should be regularly, right? It's only 2 quarts. Like, it's not going to kill you. And it's typically ATF or some gear lube, so it's not that expensive. You're looking for metal shavings, okay? You need to pay close attention to glittery looking oil or chunks. If you have chunks, that transfer case needs to come out, okay? That is right before it's about to go. All right, okay, back to the bolt. So we had the guy ask about the bolt here. So typically what happens is we're running a deep backspace wheel, which is very close right here. Okay, so if I turn this around, the nut and bolt are sticking out even further. And if you even slightly bend the wheel, what it does is it cuts this edge and the inside bead of the wheel breaks off. So instead, I just turn it around. And, you know, again, these are Unitorque. This is the way we have run bolts like this since I first built the Growler in 2006. Okay, and when you run a good quality with a Unitorque nut, I'm telling you, when you take this nut off, it pulls the threads. Like, this is the real deal. Okay, we've used these in racing. I raced this at KOH. This went 215 grueling miles. I mean, it would be 10,000 miles of anybody else out wheeling. So we know it holds up for sure. But good question and good eye for checking that, because not very many people notice that. Other questions?
There is, but it's off topic.
Okay.
You want to hold it?
All right, yeah. Why don't you hold it?
Okay.
So the next thing I want you to do, Alex, follow me along here. I happen to have lifted my Jeep up on the body bolts, but you want to look at these. I've come back from a weekend, and these are gone. So that means the body is not even connected to the frame. Okay, this stuff just vibrates out. I don't know what to tell you. There's typically 3 or 4 on the side of a vehicle, and then there's some up underneath and some in the front. So you definitely want to keep an eye on these and make sure that they're not disappearing. The other thing I did was I made sure that I had all my skid plate bolts. These commonly come loose on most Jeeps, okay? So, and then typically what happens is people start Loctiting them. Well, let me tell you something. The reason they're coming loose is because your frame is twisting. It's part of how a Jeep works. So unless you do like this, where you tie it into the cage and stop all the flex, then the skid plate bolts are going to come loose. It's just the way it is, okay? So keep track of them. Don't let them fall out. They can't get loose. You can't run them loose. You got to at least start with them tight, okay? So then you can see this is one of our elites, so it's the flat belly, and it's been pretty scratched, but it's not too badly gouged, and it's certainly not bent, so that's good. Back here, I'm checking on the exhaust to make sure that it's not rubbing on my rearmost Johnny joint right here. And I did have a little heat shield here, like this one in the front. If you look right here, I've got a heat shield in the front that I made to protect the Johnny joint from getting too much heat from the exhaust. And you can see my exhaust is wrapped, so I'm doing everything I can to keep the heat. Because the grease is going to melt out, it damages the urethane, you just don't want that. So in the back, mine's falling out, so I need to put another one in and protect this upper Johnny joint. Remember, heat rises, okay? I don't need to worry about this one, I need to worry about that one. It's right above it. And that's my tailpipe dump right there. So the next thing I'm doing, like I showed you before, I'm grabbing all these things to make sure nothing's too loose. We check the drive shaft. You're gonna shake the drive shaft up and down too. You wanna see if there's any play in the splines. If you notice, my splines are not down on this end either. They're up on that end, okay? So if I hit this on something, I'm not damaging that part of the drive shaft. So you might wanna take a look at yours. Some can be turned around, some can't, just the way it is. But when you have a quality drive shaft made, that's how you want it. And again, I'm running 1350s. These are not serviceable U-joints, so they stay lubed, and that's that. No leaks, okay? Again, if I've got a pinion seal leak, the first thing I check is my vent. And my vent is right here. So there's a big tube that comes right out of the diff case. There's one in the front as well. Here, I can light that up. Right there, that big one coming out. And if that gets kinked or obstructed somehow, what's going to happen is the first place that pushes the oil out is the pinion seal, okay? So if it's leaking there, you better start looking around. Don't just think you blew a pinion seal, because it's probably not the case, all right? And I happen to have, because I raced this, which is like we do on our race car, this has a system where if fluid goes up that tube, it goes into a little catch can, and then as soon as it cools down, it comes back down and goes back in the differential. So, but just like on the front, I want to inspect all the brackets, and you can see I've hit them, but they're still nice and square. They're doing good. There's no cracks. Everything's tight on here. I've got all the torque seal. I'm looking at the bottom of the shock bolts. Now you can see the springs in the back. They're a lot more damaged. That's because the roost that comes off the front tires just hammers these rear springs. So which also hits the shaft. So then I got to be careful to keep track of the condition of the shaft and make sure it's not getting too pitted, or that's going to screw up the seal. Yeah.
Val asked if we could show a close-up of the diff vent.
Of the vent itself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Luciano Verdura asked if you have any tricks to keep wheel studs in place for a front Ford Dana 60. For some reason, they always spin on me.
Yeah, we tack them. So typically we would do that with a TIG welder, would be the best. You put a tack weld on there and that'll keep them from spinning. That is a very dangerous condition because you think you've tightened the wheel, but it's not actually tight. So we found that back, we discovered that like back in 2010 when we were racing KOH, and we were finding the bolts were backing out, and that was like pretty scary because you're going real fast across the dry lake. Again, you guys have heard me talk about it a zillion times, limit straps all the way around. I'm making sure they're in good condition. And otherwise, I'm just looking at all of my plumbing. Is there any leaks? Do I see any wires that have gotten pinched? Do I see, you know, this is your chance to really get a visual of what's going on. Check all the welds, look for cracks, you know, and a lot of time that takes a light. You know, I'll have to get my light out and just really look carefully, you know, to make sure that we don't have anything developing. You'll, look, if you get a crack, typically, you know, you could probably get home. But you know, you wheel on that a couple of times and that sucker's gonna break off. So, and you know, all my brackets are 1/4 inch thick. Your factory stuff is half that, if at best, and it'll just rip right off. So, and probably half welded, yeah. Jamie's chiming in here.
Clean your Jeep before you.
Yes. So Jamie wanted me to remind you that I purposely left this dirty, right? You want to see it because what I'm doing is looking for things that are obvious wear spots, because they'll be shiny or something will be torn or worn or somehow, right? So that's what you're looking for. I mean, look at here. Here's another bolt that's like, you know, backing out. It's been hit and it's kind of backing out. So I'll need to fix that. And that's pretty typical. You know, this takes a beating when we're out in the rocks. You can see how scraped that is. This is that cover I built for KOH a couple years ago. So doing its job. And again, the rear control arms. Yeah, so it's been so deformed that it popped off there. Yeah. So it's just the way it is. I mean, look at the bottom of the gas tank skid, right? It's taken some hits. So I don't know if they can see that or not, but it's right here. I mean, this is just bashed. So, but that's good stuff. That's what it's for.
Tony Esther Parrott Newcomb said your Jeep is West Coast dirty.
West Coast dirty, that's
Not
right.
East Coast
So,
dirty.
by the way, I do not wash my Jeep unless I absolutely have to. Water is the worst thing you can put on your Jeep. It gets in the electrical connectors, it gets in the seals. Yeah, I mean, I'll wipe this thing down. I mean, literally, other than that oil that we found, I'm not touching this thing. This is the way it's going. So the next thing I wanted to point out to everybody is I want you to spin the wheels. Well, in this case, it's in gear. Let's go to the front wheel. I want you to spin the wheels, and they should spin smooth. They shouldn't be wobbly, right? Everything should look good. And you should do that while the thing is still on the jack. Okay, so if you took the wheel off like I did over there, before you let it down, even though the wheel's on, I want you to spin the wheel before it touches the ground. So many times people have over tightened or forgot something and they go to spin the wheel and you can hear the caliper dragging on the inside of the wheel or something funky. Look, you get a few times that you can catch something, and the last thing you want to do is load your loud Jeep up on a trailer and take off, and then you discover this out on the trail. So I saw something else over on this side too. I had already lost one of my bolts on my hub, my Yukon hub. So that means not only do you replace the bolt, but you need to check the other ones. Okay, bolts just don't fall out on their own. So these have little seals on them too. So I need to figure out, you know, like what happened. Maybe I didn't tighten it all the way. Maybe, you know, something happened. And then, you know, of course, I'm going to check my beadlock bolts. You can see I've used the side of my rim quite a bit. So we're going to check those bolts. If you do find that they need a lot of tightening, I want you to pull the valve stem and let the air out of this tire. Okay. If you find, you know, where they just need a little bit, that's fine. But if it's more than that, I want you to let that air out. There's a lot of pressure pushing on that. And the last thing I'd like to see is a stripped one and it blows off in your face.
And on that note, Rod Andrew asked how often you check the bolts on your bead locks, and do you Loctite them or put NECs on them?
Okay. Yes, all good questions. I use grease or anti-seize. Okay. On these bolts, including the washer, you want to make sure that when you torque these down, and we've talked about this on another Tech Talk, that you're getting the true torque of the bolt. What'll happen is if the bolt is dry, it will torque and seem tight, but it's actually just dry and gripping and not really getting tight. And what's going to happen is you're going to go out a few times and they're going to be loose every time. So if you get them right, grease them up, or anti-seize, do a nice job. By the way, later on down the road, when your tire wears out and you go to take those out because you got to change it, they're not going to be rusted, stuck. You know, they'll come out nice and easy, and you'll be able to reuse your wheel without having to get a new one because it stripped out all the threads. So, what else you got?
Kevin Cavallo, do you know what can cause fluid to spit out of diff breather hose, specifically on longer drives?
Yes, and we've talked about this a little bit. Your fluid in your axle is very thick. I don't know if you've ever seen it before, if you've changed it or not, but when you pour it, it's like syrup, okay? So what happens is if you just take off and get on the highway, well, that fluid isn't warmed up yet. And as it starts to build temperature inside, some of that gets stuck inside the vent tube and it creates a siphon, okay? So once it starts to push that up with pressure, now more fluid is just following it, and it can just siphon it right out of your differential. So if you have a chance to warm it up, I mean, we do that extensively on all of our high performance vehicles. We'll run them in reverse, we'll run them in forward, we'll do a bunch of stuff, and then we'll get going. So just don't be surprised. You can also just put a catch can on that will re-drain the fluid back into the differential as soon as it cools down. Another tip for you, you know, we're talking about getting ready for your favorite trip, and it might involve some river crossings. Well, remember, when your rear axle is 275 degrees and you go through a 60-degree river crossing, that sucker's going to 60 degrees right now, okay? That means it's going to suck air in, okay? Because when you cool something off, it sucks in. Remember the thing in science class where they heated a little metal can and then cooled it down and it like crushed itself? Same thing's happening in your rear axle. So whatever dust, water, whatever is at the other end of your vent, it's getting sucked right into your axle. So I recommend that when you come into a water crossing, I know it's not as fun as bombing through and having a wave come over the top of your Jeep, but you should actually go in slow and not abuse your equipment. So what do you got?
Tyler Takeo again, how often should you change the diff fluid?
If you're the guy in that water situation I was talking about, every time you come back, okay? The maximum duty cycle for a differential is 1 year. So if you read any service manual, it's always going to say change it 1 year. Now, you want your locker to operate properly. You know, I mean, axles are expensive, right? And if you've re-geared and done all this other stuff, you know, it's worth spending 40 bucks to change the oil and keep that thing alive. So, yeah.
Jeremy Balke suggested you may also want to remind people to check their battery connections. He just discovered a loose wire from his ARB compressor that fell out of the connector and was bouncing around on positive post.
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to also advise you prior to your trip to check stuff like that at night, okay? By the way, in the dark, if you have a loose connection like that, it'll be glowing red hot. So it's a great thing to check your battery and your alternator, the post where that positive line connects. If those are loose, you're gonna see it right there. So not very common, and I've seen it before, so I know. By the way, I've also seen that water sucked into the differential thing, so I've learned that firsthand, so I'm not just guessing on that. But yes, checking the rest of your vehicle, right? I mean, we've checked everything underneath. You still have the oil, the filter, the air filter, the water pump, the alternator, the battery, all those connections. By the way, most common to screw you up electrically, a loose ground. Okay, so that's something that needs to be checked. And if you've got any kind of electrical gremlin, you need to figure it out. Like that's not the kind of thing you want to start a trip with. So yeah, just you know, word of the wise. I know if there's somebody on my trip that has some kind of gremlin, we're going to figure that out before we leave, that's for sure. So, but when we go to Jeepers, we've got 45 of us going. So the likelihood of having some gremlin is pretty dang high. All right. And by the way, on your steering, you got to check the fluid on that. You got to check the fluid on your brakes, the levels. Make sure it's clean, not cloudy, aerated, nasty. All of these things will really wear out the parts fast and ruin the performance. So what other questions you got?
Stephen Featherly, I use red Loctite for my bead lock bolts. Should I still check the torque on them?
So red Loctite, before it hardens, will act as a lubricant. But man, those babies are not coming off easy. I can tell you that. I wouldn't do that again. I mean, I don't go back and mess with it now. I mean, until the tire wears out, because that's going to be a real pain. You might even have to use some heat to get it off. But yeah, I would use grease or anti-seize in the future. So, okay, so we talked about the brakes, we talked about the suspension, we talked about the tires and wheels, we talked about the front axle, the rear axle, and then everything in the motor compartment, right? So you want to make sure all your fluids are good. We talked a little bit about the transfer case and those fluids, the batteries. Don't forget about your plug wires, your spark plugs. Those are and your fuel filter. Fuel pump, fuel filter, commonly forgotten about. So I don't know where you get your gas, but we've had to get gas in some pretty sketchy situations, and it's always dirty. So or if you're getting it from your gas can, it's just easy to pick up crap going in your tank. So don't forget about those things. And don't forget to put gas in. By the way, we talked about that a little bit when Josh was here, knowing what your mileage is off-road, okay? So if you don't know, keep track of it. Know how many miles you can go. That's super important. And remember, your fuel pump is typically in the middle of your gas tank. So when you're off camber, unless you're over half a tank, that fuel pump's probably starving. So just keep that, unless you got a hydromat or something fancy in there. So what else you got?
We're pretty caught up.
How are we doing on time?
Off-topic questions.
Okay, I can take a few of those.
9
Sure, we got about
left.
10 minutes left. What do we got?
Tyler Hagen just wanted to know if we stock R1 brakes on our website.
We do. And I happen to know that we've got several sets like this in stock. And we also carry just the pad and rotor upgrade as well. So he can call in, talk to one of the guys, and find out if we have what he needs. If not, we can usually get it pretty quickly. So because R1 is very close to here.
Zach Guptill, what kind of spare parts do you guys carry when you go out? Belts, spark plugs, plug cables?
Yeah. This guy sounds like he needs our tool and spare parts list. You can either message me or email address, and I can get that over to you. But we've got a complete list of that stuff. And I always recommend that you carry every specialty tool that's specific to your vehicle and specialty part. Okay, so like I've converted mine over to a V8. Well, that means that the average Jeep guy, the belt's not going to fit, the alternator's not going to fit. All those things are unique to me. So I make sure that I carry, a throttle position sensor, a map sensor, cam sensor, crank sensor. We've got all the different sensors to make sure, because when that stuff goes out, these things are dead in the water. So you definitely need to carry all that stuff, especially if you're going on a big trip, so.
Our viewer Tasha Smith is installing a 4-inch lift on her 2014 JKU. She's got 37-inch tires and 1.75-inch wheel spacers. Does she need to re-gear?
Well, was it a Rubicon to start with? If it was a Rubicon, it is. Okay, so a Rubicon to start with on 37 is not terrible. If it's an automatic, that helps even more. The torque converter can do a little work. Those wheel spacers are something I would red Loctite. Okay, so you red Loctite the wheel spacer to the axle, okay, to the mating surface. Then you bolt the wheel onto the wheel spacer. So, and you need to recheck those. That's super important. Those come loose all the time, and you're asking for trouble because you're really leveraging everything out there. I know people sell them. It's not the right way to do it. It's a quick fix to get you down the road. So
VB Tom, is it normal for a fuel cell to seep fuel at the pump or filter or filler rings?
I wouldn't say it's normal. Here's what I would say. It's the same thing I would say about that rear pinion seal. That means pressure's building up inside your tank. So I would check the vents, okay? So you cannot allow pressure to build up inside that tank, because that also means when it cools down, it's sucking the tank together. So you really got to be careful with that stuff. A little bit of what I would call sweating on any of this stuff, whether it's some of these fittings or, I'm not worried about sweating. Actual leak, especially when we're talking about fuel, that's going to create fumes and the possibility of spark or fire, that's not a good prospect. So definitely want to keep that in control.
Tyler Takeo, is there any components that need to be checked on a manual transmission besides the clutch?
If you have the skid plate down, I would definitely check the bell housing bolts. I'd check the bolts that bolt the transfer case to the transmission. And then those yokes on either side of the transfer case. So all of that stuff is important to keep track of. And, when you're, Alex, can you come back around here? Let me grab my light. When you guys are looking at a yoke, let's look at this one right here, Alex. You can see this nut right here on the ends of the threads. Okay, well, it looks exactly the same way on the axle as it does on the transfer case. And you want to make sure that that nut is not backing off. Okay, so say we had turned this and we felt a whole bunch of play. Well, we'd have to look there, or we'd have to look up there, or to see if the, U-joints are just clapped out, what's going on. But that's something you got to investigate. So whether it's a manual or an automatic, I would definitely be keeping an eye on that as well, okay? So a manual transmission is typically a lot more simple, but what's really important is the fluid level, right? That's all gears and bearings, and you let the fluid level get too low in there and it's gonna roast that baby. So definitely keep track of that.
Kyle Hurley, can you show us again, please, how to set up a strap for pulling a rig by the axle when a sector shaft breaks?
Yeah. Do I have one down here right now? Here, I got something in here. And in this case, I'm just going to use like a winch rope, but it doesn't really matter, and a soft shackle. So if you can use a hard shackle like this as well, but typically what you're going to do is you're going to wrap it around the knuckle, right? So on mine, I've got a high steer arm and the factory knuckle, so you guys might just have this. But what you got to do is you got to wrap it around this thing, and you're going to tow from right here. So in the past, I've had to do it where I wrapped it around, like this, or, doubled it up. I mean, I've gotten really creative with what I had to do, so that, because you can't have it rub, you got to make it so that, but basically then it's going to pull it like a wagon, okay? And you'll take it to a V that's about, 5-6 feet out in front of the vehicle, and then that will pull the vehicle as you go. Now on the other end, if you've got a strap or whatever you might have, you may have to like loop this back through itself, right? Where you're able to kind of get that to tighten up on there. Let's see what I got here. So, this would be a good example of, that tightens up. So this could be a flat strap, or, in this case, it's a winch line extension. But typically you do something like this, and then this baby will tow just like a wagon. So the driver doesn't have any input at all, and it'll go right behind you. Now, if you can't run the engine, the guy might have trouble putting the brakes on. So you might need somebody behind him with another strap to kind of keep him from running into the vehicle that's towing him. So just keep that in mind. Okay? Typically, a brake like that, you really got to evaluate, where am I at? Can I not get parts? It might be easier to just run back to town and get him a steering box than it is to try and tow him. So just, I wish that's something you could just text me and I could ask you, because you got to make that call on the fly. And I can tell you ourselves on the Rubicon, we've been so far in there and had a sector shaft break that we had to go in, take a box off another Jeep, bring it out, put it on, get that Jeep into camp, and then wait for parts to show up. So sometimes you got to get creative. We've had to take knuckles off, and get the other Jeep moving. So yeah, you do what you can for sure.
Grant Herring, will the GenRight Elite work with the Evo double throwdown front? Pro Rock 60s front and rear.
It'll work with the Pro Rocks. It does require some special brackets. As you can see, this has the laid back cover. And what that does is it positions this upper mount behind all of this stuff so that we can have all the up travel. Where a normal diff cover is flat and then it puts the thing right, the upper control arm mount right here, and it would just be banging. We've got that back further. So I don't know about the rest of their stuff. I mean, honestly, I would get away from all that and just do all of our brackets with the Dynatrack axles. So, yep.
Jeff Lone, is there any clips or bolts that you would suggest having spares of just in case?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I carry extra lug nuts, I carry extra shock bolts, I carry these extra steering bolts, extra heims. I carry a left and a right on the heims. There's definitely spare, like even this Pitman arm nut, those are hard to come by. Your normal nuts that are on your knuckles, those are also very hard to come by. So again, as part of your regular maintenance, as you remove and upgrade to new stuff, this is all stuff that you should be keeping as spares that you can have. And look, if you don't want to carry them all, and you got a buddy with some common parts, you can spread it out a little bit so you're not having to be the workhorse or the donkey or whatever, to carry everything. So.
Fed A BKP, I have a first generation Dana Rock Jock 60 for my LJ. Is the diff cover bolt same torque than the 70s and 80s? And if so, do you happen to know what the torque spec is?
I don't know. The torque spec is based on the size of the bolt. And I keep a little, I might have it right here in my box. I keep a little chart. No, it's not here. But I keep a chart that tells me, a 3/8 bolt has this, a 5/16 bolt, a 3/4, a 5/8, So you can go on and just Google and search it, and you can get the SAE bolt torque spec, or if it's metric, you can get the metric bolt spec. But it's really handy to have, and you can reference it all the time. By the way, when we go to race, we actually will write right on the nut or the socket what the spec is, so the pit crew guy can just torque it right to that spec. So, what else we got?
Zach Guptill, I drive a 97 TJ on a 4-inch lift with 33s and stock axles. Is a slip yoke something I should seriously look at soon? I haven't had any issues, but I know some people do. My plan is to go axles, big lift, transfer swap in the next couple of years. So if it's not a necessary thing, I'd prefer to just wait.
Yeah.
And by big lift, he means 3/4 inch link instead of just coil springs and control.
Yeah, that's fine. So if you're still running a slip yoke eliminator, the reason you want to get rid of that, a slip yoke, the reason you want an eliminator is because if that comes out, all of your fluid dumps, okay? So, and then when you get one, don't get the cheap one, what they call a hack and tap. You want the one with a completely new shaft, okay? And when you get the new shaft, you also get a 32 spline, so it's a larger, and then you get a real yoke that goes on there, and that's the one that's gonna last for a long time. Even in your 231 or whatever transfer case you have, that will last a long time. And I highly recommend that, because then you're going to put on a drive shaft that is much better quality, and the slip is in the shaft, not in the tail housing or the transfer case. So again, the manufacturer does it that way because it's inexpensive. Now you're upgrading, you want something more heavy duty, it's a better way to go. So, and remember, your stock drive shaft runs darn near flat. Once you start putting a lift in it, now it's really quite offset. So.
We're running low on time.
Oh, yeah.
So I got 2 more questions.
Okay, 2 more.
Thomas Erkey, do you keep your spare parts in your trailer or carry them?
So that depends on how far I'm going. So if it's something like the Rubicon, they're absolutely with me because that's a long walk. If we're just out at High Desert Roundup or out at Johnson Valley, then I have limited numbers of those with me because I know I can just have a buddy give me a ride back and we can get parts if we need them. Yep.
Mike Lasher, at what age do you recommend replacing tires? I don't use my Jeep enough to wear them out, but they're getting up there in age.
Yeah, so, we're not running these tires where we're worried about them blowing apart because they're old, right? We just don't even run that much pressure in them. So what happens is the tires get hard. So what you want to do is you want the rubber where it's still got some grip to it. So, if your tires are old and kind of hard, sometimes if you run them a little bit, they'll break through what's aged right on the surface and get you back to some rubber. But if that's not the case, then it's probably time to replace them. So good question.
And it's time to say goodbye.
All right. Thanks, everybody. On Thursday, we are going to have a gentleman here with a bunch of things to show from Vision X LED lights. So we're going to talk all about LED lights. It'll be great. Everybody loves lights. And meantime, hopefully this was helpful to get you prepped for your next trip. So thanks again for tuning in.